impoverished artist gifted her last painting, only to discover it was for a billionaire. Sarah Miles had learned how to live quietly. Quiet footsteps up the cracked wooden stairs, quiet breathing when the landlord's truck passed the building, quiet hunger so it wouldn't distract her while she painted. Her studio apartment, if it could even be called that, sat above an abandoned bakery on the edge of the city. The windows were fogged with age, the heater hadn't worked in months, and the smell of turpentine mixed with dust and old bread hung in the air like a memory that refused to leave. In the center of the room stood her easel, and on it, her final painting. Sarah stepped back, her bare feet cold against the concrete floor, and stared at the canvas like it might speak to her. It was vibrant in a way the rest of her life was not. Deep blues, soft golds, warm light breaking through shadow. A woman stood in the painting, her back turned, facing a sunrise she wasn't sure she deserved. Sarah swallowed. "This is it," she whispered. Her last canvas, her last tube of paint, her last reason to believe she wasn't wasting her life. She had poured everything into it, every regret, every dream she'd postponed, every night she'd gone to bed hungry but hopeful. Each brushstroke felt like a confession, each color a goodbye. She glanced toward the small table by the wall. An eviction notice lay there, folded but not forgotten. 7 days. Her fridge was empty except for a bottle of water and half a lemon. Her phone buzzed only with overdue reminders. Galleries had stopped responding to her emails months ago. Friends had stopped asking how she was doing even earlier than that. People like to say, "Don't give up on your dreams." But no one ever explained how to pay rent while chasing them. Sarah wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself and walked back to the painting. She touched the edge of the canvas gently, almost apologetically. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Maybe in another life I would have kept you." She hadn't planned to give it away. The idea came from exhaustion, not hope. Earlier that day, she'd been at the Community Art Center, hoping again to find work. The director, an older woman with kind eyes, had sighed softly when she saw Sarah's portfolio. "You're talented," she'd said. "You always have been." Talent, Sarah had learned, was not currency. As Sarah turned to leave, the woman mentioned something almost casually. "There's a donor," she said, "very private, doesn't attend events. He supports art anonymously. Sometimes he accepts personal pieces, originals, no names attached." Sarah paused. "Accepts?" she asked. The woman nodded. "He believes art should be given, not sold. Says the intention matters more than the price." That sentence stayed with Sarah all the way home. The intention matters more than the price. Now, standing alone in her freezing studio, Sarah realized something painful and freeing at the same time. She didn't want to sell this painting. Selling it would turn it into survival. Giving it would let it stay honest. She packed the canvas carefully, wrapping it in brown paper, tying it with string she'd saved from old deliveries. No signature, no contact information, just a small handwritten note tucked inside. "This painting was made during a time when I had very little, but I still believed in beauty. I hope it brings you peace." She hesitated before sealing it. Once it was gone, there would be nothing left. No backup plan, no safety net, no more pretending she was almost there. Sarah exhaled slowly and tied the final knot. The next morning, she delivered the package to the address the art center had given her, a modest office building downtown. Nothing about it hinted at wealth. No luxury cars, no gold letters, just glass doors and a quiet receptionist who accepted the package without asking questions. As Sarah walked away, she felt lighter and emptier. She didn't know that the man who would unwrap that painting lived behind iron gates, known by headlines but not by people. She didn't know he hadn't felt anything real in years. And she certainly didn't know that her final brushstroke was about to reach someone who had everything except what her art carried. Sarah thought she was giving something away. She had no idea she was about to be found. The house sat far from the city, not high above it, not glowing with lights, but hidden behind tall iron gates and old trees that blocked the world out. From the outside, it looked less like a mansion and more like a place someone had retreated to on purpose. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. Elliot Grayson stood alone in a long hallway lined with art, originals worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Paintings from private collections, sculptures acquired at auctions no cameras were allowed to film, pieces museums had begged him to loan. None of them made him stop. Elliot was 62 years old and had spent 40 years building an empire. He was called a genius by business magazines, a mystery by journalists, and untouchable by competitors. His name moved markets, his silence unsettled rooms. But none of that followed him here. Here, he was just a man walking slowly, hands folded behind his back, eyes distant. He paused at the end of the hallway where a single empty hook waited on the wall. Another one? His assistant Margaret asked softly from behind him. She had worked for Elliot for 17 years. She knew not to speak unless invited. She also knew when he needed someone near. Yes, he replied. From the art center. She handed him the wrapped package. No name? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Elliot shook his head. There never is. He carried it into the private study, a room no guests ever entered. The windows were tall but covered by sheer curtains. Dust floated through sunbeams. A grand piano sat untouched in the corner. This was where the paintings came first, before they were valued, before they were archived, before they were framed in gold. Elliot unwrapped the brown paper carefully, like the canvas might shatter if he rushed. When the painting was revealed, he froze. Not because it was technically perfect, but because it was honest. The colors were raw, the light imperfect. The woman in the painting stood at the edge of something, hope or goodbye. Elliot couldn't tell which. He stepped closer. His chest tightened. "I know this feeling," he whispered. Margaret watched from the doorway. She'd seen hundreds of paintings pass through this room. None had ever made him stop like this. He reached inside the wrapping and found the note. He read it once, then again. His hands trembled slightly. "This was made during a time when I had very little, but I still believed in beauty." Elliot sank into the chair behind him. For the first time in years, his mind didn't rush to strategy or numbers or loss. It went somewhere else, 27 years earlier, to a woman standing by a window, sunlight in her hair, paint on her fingers. "Clara," he breathed. Margaret frowned. She'd heard that name only once before. "Your wife?" she asked gently. Elliot nodded. Clara had been an artist too, brilliant, passionate, unafraid. She believed art mattered more than money, that creation was an act of faith, that beauty should be shared even when it cost you something. He loved her and failed her. When illness took her, Elliot built his empire higher, colder, farther away from everything that reminded him of what he'd lost. He collected art not to show it, but to stay close to her world without stepping back into it. This painting broke the rules. It wasn't polished, it wasn't famous, it wasn't safe. It was desperate and alive. "Find her," he said suddenly. Margaret blinked. "Sir?" "The artist," he said. "I don't care how private she wanted to be. I need to meet her." Margaret hesitated. "You've never asked that before." "I know." Elliot stood, his eyes never leaving the painting. And I won't let this one disappear into silence. Margaret nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. As she left, Elliot remained standing there staring at the canvas. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her face. But he knew one thing with terrifying certainty. Whoever painted this was standing on the edge of losing everything. And somehow, she had reached him.
The knock on the door came at 8:17 a.m. Sarah knew the sound. Sharp, official, final. She didn't open it right away. She sat on the edge of her mattress, staring at the peeling paint on the wall, counting her breaths like that might buy her time. 1, 2, 3. The knock came again. Miss Miles? A man's voice called through the door. Property management. Sarah closed her eyes. She already knew what he was holding on the other side of that door. She stood slowly, her joints stiff from sleeping in the cold, and crossed the room. When she opened the door, the man avoided her eyes. He handed her the paper, already folded. End of the week, he said quietly. I'm sorry. She nodded, because crying in front of strangers had stopped helping years ago. When the door shut, the apartment felt even smaller. 7 days. She set the notice down on the table, right where the painting had sat just days before. The empty space beside it felt louder than the words on the page. She had given away her last hope, and now there was nothing left to sell. Sarah spent the morning calling numbers she'd written down months ago. Cafes, print shops, small galleries, anyone who might need part-time help. Most didn't answer. Some said they'd call back. No one did. By afternoon, hunger had sharpened into something dizzying. She drank water to trick her stomach and pulled on her coat. The city outside was alive in a way that felt cruel. People hurried past with coffee cups, conversations, plans. Sarah walked between them like a ghost. She ended up at the art center without realizing she'd gone there. The director looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across her face. Sarah? Sarah tried to smile. It didn't work. I just wanted to ask, she said carefully, about the painting. The one I dropped off. The woman paused. It was received, she said. That's all I know. Did he say anything? Sarah asked. The director shook her head. He never does. Of course he didn't. Sarah thanked her and turned to leave, but the woman spoke again. For what it's worth, she said gently, that was a brave thing you did. Sarah nodded. Brave didn't pay rent. That night, Sarah packed what little she owned into 2 suitcases. Clothes worn thin, old sketchbooks, a box of letters she never reread. She left the easel standing, bare and useless. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. Her heart jumped before she could stop it. Hello? She answered. There was a pause on the other end. My name is Margaret Hale. I'm calling on behalf of someone who recently received a painting through the downtown art center. Sarah gripped the phone. Yes? He would like to meet you. The world tilted. Meet me? Sarah whispered. Why? Another pause. He believes your work is important. Sarah's eyes burned. I don't understand, she said honestly. That's all right, Margaret replied. Neither did he, at first. They agreed to meet the following afternoon. The address Margaret gave her was not downtown. It wasn't anywhere Sarah recognized. When the call ended, Sarah sat on the floor, phone still pressed to her ear. For the first time in weeks, she laughed. Then she cried. Then she wondered if it was a mistake. The next day, she stood outside the gates, staring. The property was enormous, silent, intimidating. This wasn't a gallery. This wasn't an office. This was a world she had never imagined stepping into. A guard approached, checking her name against a list before letting her through. Inside, Margaret met her with a polite smile. She's waiting, she said. As they walked through the quiet halls, Sarah's footsteps echoed. Paintings lined the walls, masterpieces she recognized from textbooks. And then she saw it, her painting, hanging alone at the end of the hallway, lit softly, reverently. Her knees nearly gave out. That's mine, she whispered. Margaret glanced at her. Yes, it is. The door at the end of the hall opened, and the man who had everything stepped forward to meet the woman who had nothing left to lose. Sarah had imagined this moment 100 different ways. A cold man in a suit, a dismissive handshake, a transaction. What she hadn't imagined was someone who looked tired. Elliot Grayson stood just inside the doorway, hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't distant either. His hair was silver at the temples, his posture straight, yet heavy, like someone who carried years on his shoulders. For a moment, neither of them spoke.
The room seemed to wait. "You painted it?" Elliot said finally. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. Yes, he studied her. Not in the way collectors studied artists, but the way someone studies a memory they're afraid to touch. "Why did you give it away?" he asked. The question landed harder than she expected. Sarah glanced toward the painting at the end of the hall. Seeing it there, clean, protected, valued, made her chest ache. "Because I didn't want it to become something I resented," she said softly. "If I sold it just to survive, it would have meant less." Elliot's jaw tightened. "You could have sold it for a great deal," he said. She almost laughed. "I didn't know that. I just knew I was done holding on to things that hurt." Something in Elliot's eyes shifted. He gestured toward the study. "Please, sit." They sat across from each other, a low table between them. The room smelled faintly of old books and oil paint. "I've collected art for a long time. I've never asked to meet the artist before." Sarah swallowed. "Then why me?" He hesitated. "Because your painting felt like it was looking back at me, like it knew something about loss." Sarah felt her throat close. "I painted that woman when I thought I was done. She's standing there because she doesn't know if she should walk away or stay." Elliot closed his eyes briefly. "My wife painted like that," he said quietly. Sarah froze. She believed art was a conversation, that when you create something honestly, someone, somewhere will hear it. He looked at her again. "Your painting spoke to me." The room went still. Sarah hadn't realized how badly she needed to hear that until it happened. "Thank you," she whispered. Elliot stood and walked to the painting, studying it again. "I want to support your work, not buy it. Support it." Her heart raced. "I don't want charity," she said quickly. "I know," he replied. Neither did Clara. He turned back to her. "I want to fund your time, your space, your freedom to create without fear." Sarah stared at him. "You don't even know me." He smiled faintly. "I know enough." She thought of the eviction notice, the empty fridge, the nights she'd spent convincing herself to keep going. "And what do you get?" she asked. Elliot looked at the painting one more time. "I get to believe again, that something honest can still change someone." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks before she could stop them. This wasn't rescue, this was recognition. But before she could answer, Margaret appeared quietly in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Sir, there's something you should know." Elliot turned, and in that moment, everything shifted. Margaret didn't step fully into the room. She stayed in the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame, as if she wasn't sure she should interrupt whatever fragile thing had just formed between them. "I just got a call from the property manager listed on Ms. Miles' file," she said carefully. Sarah's stomach dropped. Elliot turned slowly. "And?" "She has an eviction notice," Margaret continued. "Final, 7 days." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's face burned. "I didn't ask her to check," Elliot said quietly. Margaret nodded. "I know, but if we're going to move forward, you should have the full picture." Sarah stood up abruptly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't come here to be discussed." Elliot raised a hand gently. "Sarah, please." She hesitated, then sat back down, though every instinct in her screamed to leave before this turned into pity. "I wasn't going to mention it. I didn't want this to feel like leverage." Elliot met her eyes. "It doesn't." "But it could," she replied, "and that matters." He nodded slowly. "You're right. It does." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "May I ask you something?" he said. Sarah folded her hands together. "Okay." "When did you stop believing someone would find you?" he asked. The question was so unexpected it stole her breath. She laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was true. "When my mother died," she said after a moment. "She was the only one who ever told me my art mattered before I had proof." Elliot listened without interrupting. "She used to sit on the floor of my room while I painted, even when we didn't have money, even when I told her it was pointless. She said, 'Someone will see you one day, Not the world, just someone. Her voice broke. I guess I waited a long time for that. Elliot leaned back, his eyes distant. Clara used to say the same thing, that being seen by one person was enough. Silence settled again, but this time it felt shared. I won't pay your rent, Elliot said suddenly. Sarah looked up, startled. Not because you don't need it, but because I don't want your work tied to survival. That poisons creation. Her confusion deepened. Then what are you offering? She asked. Elliot stood and walked to a cabinet, opening it slowly. Inside were folders, neatly labeled, untouched for years. I own a building downtown, he said. It used to be studios. It's been empty since Clara passed. He turned back to her. I want you to have one of those spaces, rent-free, for as long as you need. No deadlines, no contracts that trap you. Sarah's hands trembled. And the apartment? She asked quietly. I'll buy the building, Elliot said simply. The tenants stay, you included. Ownership transfers to a trust. Sarah stared at him. That's too much. He shook his head. It's enough. She stood again, overwhelmed. I don't know how to accept this. You don't have to accept me, Elliot replied. Just accept the space. Tears streamed freely now. I was ready to quit. I was ready to stop painting. Elliot looked at her steadily. That's why this matters, because you didn't. Margaret cleared her throat softly. There is one more thing, she said. Both of them turned. The press has picked up movement around the building purchase. If they connect it to you, your privacy may not survive. Sarah's heart sank. Elliot didn't look surprised. Nothing honest ever stays hidden, he said. He looked back at Sarah. And that's the real cost. She took a deep breath. For the first time, she understood that being seen didn't just mean being saved. It meant being changed.
The article went live on a Tuesday morning. It didn't mention Sarah's name at first, just a headline buried halfway down a business page. Reclusive billionaire quietly reopens art studios after decades. By noon, it had been shared thousands of times. By evening, someone had found the artist. Sarah learned about it when her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize, emails from galleries that had ignored her for years, interview requests stacked faster than she could read them. One message stood out. Is it true you were living on the edge of eviction when Elliot Grayson discovered you? Her hands shook as she locked the phone and set it face down. The studio Elliot had given her was beautiful. High ceilings, tall windows, light that moved across the walls like it belonged there. But suddenly, it felt exposed. She hadn't even finished unpacking. A knock echoed through the space. She flinched. It was Margaret, looking more tired than usual. The press is downstairs, she said gently. We've kept them out, for now. Sarah rubbed her temples. I didn't ask for this, she said. I know. I just wanted to paint, Sarah whispered. Margaret nodded. That's usually how it starts. Later that evening, Elliot called. I can shut this down. One statement, one wall of lawyers, silence returns. Sarah stared at the unfinished canvas in front of her. And what would that cost? She asked. Elliot was quiet. My reputation, he said, and your voice. She exhaled. All my life, Sarah said slowly, no one wanted to hear me. Now they do, and I'm terrified. That means it matters, Elliot replied. But what if they don't see the work? She asked. What if they only see the story? That's always the risk, he said. Even Clara feared that. Sarah paused. Did she ever regret being seen? She asked. Elliot didn't answer right away. No, he said finally. She regretted when she hid. The next day, Sarah agreed to one interview, just one.
No glamour shots, no pity angle. She stood in her studio, paint on her hands, and spoke plainly. I gave that painting away because I thought it was my last. I didn't know who it was for. I just knew I needed to let it go. The clip went viral, not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. People saw themselves in her words, in her fear, in her stubborn hope. Orders came in, not for her painting, but for prints, workshops, talks. Sarah turned them all down. I don't want to become a brand, she told Elliot. Then don't. Be a person who paints. But the world wasn't done knocking. That night, as Sarah locked up the studio, she found someone waiting outside. A woman in her late 40s, nervous, familiar. "Sarah?" asked the woman. Sarah's breath caught. It was her sister, the one she hadn't spoken to in 12 years. "I saw you online, and I thought maybe now you'd listen." Sarah's chest tightened. The past had found her too. Sarah didn't invite her sister inside right away. They stood on the sidewalk beneath the studio lights, traffic humming in the distance, the city pretending not to notice two lives colliding after 12 silent years. "You look different," Emily said softly. Sarah almost laughed. "So do you," she replied. Emily shifted her weight, clutching her purse like it might disappear if she let go. "I didn't know where you went after Mom died." "You knew," Sarah said. "You just didn't come." Emily flinched. "I couldn't watch you destroy yourself," she said, "painting when you had no money, no plan." Sarah's voice tightened. "I couldn't watch you give up on me." The words landed heavy between them. They ended up inside the studio anyway, two sisters surrounded by blank walls and unfinished canvases. Emily walked slowly, absorbing the space. "This is beautiful," she admitted. "It's new," Sarah said. "So am I." Emily sighed. "I came to say I'm sorry, and to ask if you're okay." Sarah studied her sister's face, the familiar eyes, the lines life had added. "I'm learning," Sarah said, "how to be seen without disappearing." Emily nodded. "I always knew you were talented. I was just afraid talent wouldn't save you." Sarah swallowed. "It didn't, but it kept me alive." Across town, Elliot sat in a boardroom full of people who wanted answers. "You're risking your image," one advisor warned. "This artist, she's becoming the story." Elliot folded his hands calmly. "Then let her be." "Your shareholders are doing just fine," he interrupted. "This isn't a campaign, it's a choice." Later that night, Elliot visited the studio. He found Sarah sitting on the floor, sketchbook open, eyes tired. "Your sister?" he asked. "She came and went, like most people." Elliot sat beside her. "You don't owe anyone access, not even family." Sarah looked at him. "What if I'm afraid to build something real because it could break again?" Elliot didn't answer immediately. "When Clara got sick, I stopped planning for a future. I thought loving anything deeply was reckless." He met Sarah's eyes. "But emptiness is worse." Sarah nodded slowly. "I don't want to disappear again, but I don't want to belong to the noise." Elliot smiled faintly. "Then build a life that makes space for both." As he stood to leave, Sarah said, "Why are you still here?" He paused. "Because your work reminds me of who I was before I became careful." After he left, Sarah stood alone in the studio. She looked at the canvas in front of her, blank, waiting. For the first time, she wasn't painting to survive. She was painting to stay. The invitation arrived wrapped in careful language. A private gala celebrating philanthropic contributions to the arts. Sarah read it twice, then set it down like it might bite her. "They want you there," Margaret said over the phone, "not as a guest, as context." Sarah exhaled slowly. "Context for what?" "For Elliot," Margaret replied honestly, "and for the story they've already written." That evening, Elliot stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in years. He looked composed, but his hands betrayed him. "I can cancel," he said when Sarah arrived at the house. "I've canceled bigger things." Sarah shook her head. "No," she said. "Running is what made this messy in the first place." He studied her, surprised. "You don't owe me this," he said. "I know. I owe myself honesty." The gala was everything Sarah hated: crystal lights, practiced smiles, conversations that floated above meaning. Eyes followed them as they entered. Whispers bloomed. "That's her. The artist. The poor one." A man stepped forward, microphone in hand, smile sharp. "Mr. Grayson," he said, "care to comment on the rumor that this entire project is an image cleanse?" The room went quiet. Elliot looked at Sarah. She nodded once. He turned back to the crowd. "I didn't fund art to look generous. I did it because I forgot how to listen." Murmurs rippled. "And Sarah didn't save me. She reminded me." The host turned towards Sarah. "Care to respond?" Every instinct screamed to shrink. She didn't. "I didn't know who he was. I didn't paint for him. I painted because I was afraid of becoming silent." The room stilled. If generosity makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because it asks you to see people instead of stories. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, applause. Not thunderous, real. Later, outside, Sarah breathed in cold air like she'd earned it. "I was terrified," she admitted. "So was I. Thank you for staying." She looked at him. "I wasn't standing beside you. I was standing as myself." He smiled, and for the first time, the spotlight didn't feel like fire. It felt like warmth. Time didn't explode forward. It unfolded. Spring softened into summer, and the studio filled with light that stayed longer each evening. Sarah painted almost every day, not with urgency, not with fear, but with intention. Some days she finished a piece. Other days she simply sat and sketched, letting silence do part of the work. People still came by. Collectors, journalists, curators. She turned most of them away, not because she was afraid anymore, but because she was careful. She had learned the difference. One afternoon, a small envelope waited on her table when she arrived at the studio. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "My daughter hasn't spoken since the accident. She stood in front of your painting for an hour and cried. Thank you for giving her somewhere to begin again." Sarah pressed the note to her chest. This was why. Across the city, Elliot stood in a room that no longer belonged only to him. The old studio building had come alive, artists laughing in hallways, music leaking through doors, murals blooming on brick walls. He walked slowly, unnoticed, watching something he had once believed impossible: creation without control. Margaret joined him, smiling softly. "You've done something rare," she said. "You let go." Elliot nodded. "I stopped confusing ownership with love." That evening, Sarah joined him on the rooftop. The city stretched below them, alive and imperfect. "I've been offered a solo exhibition," she said. Elliot waited. "In New York," she added, "a big one." "That's incredible," he said. "It scares me," she admitted, "because it could change everything." He met her gaze. "It will, but not the part that matters." She smiled faintly. "I don't want to be famous," she said. "I want to be honest." "Then you already are," Elliot replied. They stood there as the sun dipped low. "I'm not staying here forever," Sarah said quietly. Elliot nodded. "I know. But I'm not leaving either. Not the work, not the people." Elliot felt something loosen inside him. That night, he returned to the private study. He removed one painting from the wall, her first, the one she'd given away when she thought she was done. He placed it in the center of the room, no longer as a relic, but as a beginning. The painting never moved again. It stayed in the private study, not because it was the most valuable piece Elliot owned, but because it was the one that changed him. Visitors were never brought there. No plaques were added, no spotlight was installed. It didn't need one. Years later, Sarah stood in a different studio. This one overlooked the Hudson River. The windows were wide and open, letting in wind and noise and life. Her hair was streaked with paint, her hands steady, her eyes certain. She still painted slowly. Fame had come in waves, but she learned how to step in and out of it. Exhibitions came and went, interviews faded. What stayed was the work and the people it reached. A young artist once asked her, "What was the moment everything changed?" Sarah smiled. "The moment I stopped trying to keep my art safe," she said, "and let it be true instead." Back in the city, the studio building thrived. Artists paid what they could or nothing at all. Walls filled with stories. Music drifted into the street. People gathered not to be seen, but to belong. Elliot watched it all from a distance. He no longer attended galas, no longer chased legacies carved in stone. His name still mattered, but it didn't define him. One afternoon, Sarah visited the house beyond the gates. They walked through the halls together, slower now. "I'm leaving for a while. Teaching. Traveling." "I figured. You were never meant to stay still." They stopped in front of the painting. Her painting. "I used to think this was the end, the last thing I'd ever make." Elliot shook his head. "It was the first honest thing you gave away." She looked at him. "And you?" He smiled. "It reminded me that generosity isn't about saving someone, it's about listening when they speak." They stood in silence, not empty, full. As Sarah left, Elliot remained in the study, alone but not lonely. He sat down, hands folded, eyes resting on the canvas. Somewhere, years ago, a struggling artist had given away her last painting without knowing who would receive it. And somewhere else, a man who had everything had finally received what he was missing. Not ownership, not recognition, but connection. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more stories that remind us how one small act can change a life forever.